Through the Gates is produced under the support of the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management to enhance, promote, and defend the North American model of wildlife conservation and responsible wildlife management. That's our mission. We're engaged in fighting at every level so that wildlife management remains science-based and conservation continues to work for our wildlife. To learn more and join the movement, visit SaveTheHuntColorado.com. The North American model of wildlife conservation is the greatest conservation model in the world. It's a success story that should be shared and celebrated because everybody is a part of it. We're here for another episode of Through the Gates podcast, and we're going to cover a little bit of a background of some individuals. We've got two guests on this particular edition, and the first guest that I've got is a former Colorado Parks and Wildlife Area Wildlife Manager by the name of Mr. Lyle Sidener. And known Lyle a long time, probably better than 35 years. Retired several years ago, but he's got a heck of a story just because of the way Colorado has changed and why he got involved. So Lyle, introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you do.
All right. Well, right now I'm retired. I'm a retired game warden, so I get to do whatever I want. My background, I worked for Division of Wildlife and CPW for 30 years. I came to that grew up in Salida, a good place for a kid to grow up that likes outdoor stuff, hunting, fishing, that kind of thing, and looked at the local game wardens, and I thought, man, that's a pretty cool career. I want to see what I can do to get to that, and that's the direction I took. Went to college at CSU, got a degree in wildlife biology, and was lucky enough to get hired by Division of Wildlife in 1990. There's a pretty substantial training period after you get hired, and then you get your first district assignment. And for me, that was Colorado Springs. Great opportunity, great folks to work with while I was down there.
That's where you and I met.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Things that I was able to participate in there, and then did that for, I signed there in 91 and then transferred to the Palisade district on the West Slope. Had the west end of the Grand Mesa as my district for the next, from 99 to 05. Again, same job title, but entirely different job duties. Worked with another group of folks that were phenomenal and got exposed to some different things over there. And then in 05, applied for and promoted to the Area Wildlife Manager job, the supervisor job in Middle Park. And I was there for the last half of my career, so 15 years in Summit County, Summit, Grand, a little bit of Eagle, a little bit of Route, and supervised six game wardens, a property technician, and a customer service office.
Well, today's environment is much different than when you got hired, and Colorado's changed dramatically. The western United States has changed dramatically. You actually saw two ballot initiatives in the early 90s, one in 1992, Initiative 10, to ban the spring harvest of bears and take away baiting and hounds. And then in 96, you saw the constitutional amendment, Amendment 14, to take away trapping. Take away trapping as a recreational tool and anything on public land outside of cage traps. You watched the Proposition 120 or 114 in 2020 over the wolf issue, and you just got done watching and highly participating and engaging on Proposition 127 that we just recently defeated in November of 24. But from your perspective, and we'll get into the sheep side of things, but from your perspective, how has Colorado changed, or how has the western United States changed as far as wildlife management from when you were a wet behind the ears greenhorn to where it's at now?
Well, there's a lot of different things. I mean, Colorado's a different place than it was in 1990 or when I was growing up in Salida. Technology, living through those ballot initiatives as a state employee and being told you can't take a position on it. You can provide information, but you can't take a position. And that honestly it kicked my butt because I'd gone through college and you're the DWM game warden, you're the boots on the ground interface with the public, and somebody asks you about the trapping ban or the bear initiative, and you can't say that it's wrong for wildlife or that it's wrong for sportsmen. And a lot of people don't realize, but game wardens are the best advocates for sportsmen. People think about, all they're doing is trying to catch people, and
you're protecting the resource.
We're protecting the resource, and so you're the front-facing face of the agency for sportsmen, and we teach hunter ed, and we teach kids that these are ethics, and this is wildlife management, and things like that. And it was really hard to face sportsmen, and they say, how come you're not taking a stand on this? Well, I wear a uniform that has a patch on it, says I work for the state of Colorado, and I can't as an employee. Yeah. And it was tough. And
well, you and I had a lot of harsh discussions back in the early '90s over that stuff.
We absolutely did. I mean, and you were one of the people asking that question. And it's like, I just can't. And so I retired in 2020, right in the middle of the wolf issue.
Before the ballot.
Before the ballot, and saw how that went. And the lion thing came up, obviously in front of the commission and then in the legislature, and I did what I could, talk to my local legislators, and then the ballot initiative, and you approached me to see what I could do to help out, and I said, you know what, I got time on my hands, and I'm able to help. I'll do what I can. So
well, and the experts. I mean, then that was part of our campaign that we did on that too, was to let the scientists, let the experts continue to manage Colorado's wildlife, but not just in Colorado, straight across the board.
Right.
And from your involvement over the course of the last 30 some odd years, have you seen a changing dynamic or a changing demographic in the way things have played out as far as public perception or how politics have played into all of this?
Well, yeah. I mean, somebody who's lived in Colorado this long, how can you look at Colorado and not say that there's been a change in the landscape? I mean, but part of that too is just seeing within the agency. When I got hired, I don't remember the numbers exactly. There were 7 of us that were hired as DWMs, and I remember the testing process, the written test. I think they did it on 3 different days in Denver, and because they only had room for like 100 to 150 people in each room, so there's 400 to 500 people, qualified applicants that were taking that test. Well, a good friend of mine was the training coordinator for CPW. He was in that same training class as I, and so he was the guy when he retired that was hiring those DWMs, and he was lucky to get 60 or 70 applicants for 20 positions. So, and I may have those numbers wrong, but that's a big difference. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of people that were interested in that position, and then things changed. I mean, that's the demographic. I mean, there's so many other things going on in people's lives, but that even within the agency,
politics started playing a bigger role in things over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, even though it was still politically driven to some degree. The animal rights extremism started to infiltrate a lot of government, a lot of politics throughout the West, and I think it created frustration from sportsmen, from landowners, from managers, biologists, scientists, and politicians themselves, because they didn't want to have that infiltration, come from unknowing, misinformed, agenda-driven individuals.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a different landscape than, and I said that 1,000 times on the 127 thing. I'll probably get arrows for this, but as a trained biologist, I realize that wolves are missing on our landscape, and I'll admit that. But Colorado's a different place than it was in 1930.
Right.
And there's more people, and there's more competition for resources, be it wildlife or be it recreational opportunities. So it's Colorado's not the place for wolves.
Well, and I think we could all agree, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, that you want the best for the wildlife that's here. It's just, how do you obtain that? How do you achieve that? And while animal rights extremists have a different philosophy than the majority of the sportsmen or game wardens or biologists, wolves are absent. They're here now, but not in the numbers that they were. Can they be in the numbers that they were and actually, have this holistic, organic philosophy that everything's just going to be like it was, in 1796? I don't think so. And I think that the science would prove otherwise when you got 6 million people in the state.
Yep. And, Western Colorado still has an agricultural background, and there's people that make their living on that. And I, had conversations with people talking about the Lion Initiative. Well, they get reimbursed. Well, that's not what those ag producers want. They
wouldn't have gotten reimbursed under 127,
right? Because
they would have been taken out of a big game status, which would then prohibited CPW from compensating because they wouldn't be a big game animal anymore,
right? And they could say, well, they can be compensated, but Middle Park's it's the center of the wolf universe.
Yeah.
I mean, in the last year, and those ag producers, those are guys that I worked with. And there's an ag producer that lost, again, not great for numbers, but 17, 18 animals. Well, what's that? What's that a hit on his paycheck? He gets paid once a year when those animals go to market. I don't know, $20,000. I'm not willing to take a $20,000 hit on a paycheck.
And 99% of the people aren't or can't.
Absolutely.
Either. Especially on a shoestring budget, when you start looking at what it takes to raise food for the American people, what the agriculture industry has invested into this entire process.
Right.
And they shouldn't be dealt with. They shouldn't have to deal with things that are beyond their control. And when you get into the wolf conversation, and we're going to jump right into the bighorn sheep deal because, and I think it's a good segue. You get into the wolf conversation. If CPW can't manage wolves appropriately for the benefit of wolves, the people, the landscape, and all the other species, then that's not scientific biological wildlife management. And if you look at what the antis did on this specific 127, it was all about the trophy hunting of lions, trophy hunting of bobcats. But then they started getting frustrated that message wasn't resonating well enough through the latter part of the campaign. Then they started calling out bighorn sheep hunters and elk hunters and deer hunters, all the trophy hunters from around the world. And so jumping into that, there's not a difference between hunting when it comes to the management side of that there is a difference between perception of hunting. So from your experience, I mean, you worked underneath of a logo of a bighorn sheep. It's the state animal. It's on the logo for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the Division of Wildlife, the Game and Fish. What did you see happen in a 30-year period from where bighorn sheep started to where when you became a game warden and to where when you retired in 2020, how has the sheep population flourished, or what problems has there been when you're actually trying to escalate and enhance a population like bighorn sheep that were not confrontational and they were not under the gun so much to speak until the anti started getting involved, or if the agriculture community started getting involved when it came to domestic livestock and sheep?
Yeah, to hit on a point you made earlier, that in 127, I saw that their next step was going to be sheep hunters.
Yep.
Because in their mind, there's only one reason to hunt sheep, and that's for the trophy. Well, that's you don't understand wildlife management if you make a statement like that.
Yes.
Because sheep are very subject to management issues regarding disease. I mean, they're probably the poster child when it comes to managing population numbers so that they don't have too dense a population, because they're so susceptible for transmission of disease within that population. So get that out of the way right away. That there's to say that there's only one reason to hunt sheep. I I'd have to look at it, but I don't think there's a sheep herd in the state that doesn't have some form of female harvest associated with it for that reason. But through my career, I was fortunate enough to work with sheep everywhere I was. In Colorado Springs, it wasn't in my district, but as a work group, we worked with sheep on Rampart Range, and we treated them for disease, and we trapped them for relocation to other parts of the state. Iconic animal. I mean, that's you say iconic wildlife, and bighorn sheep is probably at the top of the list. When I went to Palisade, again, kind of the same thing. There was a sheep introduction going on there that I was able to participate in. We went to Gunnison and to Colorado Springs and got some of those same sheep that I had worked with in Colorado Springs and used them for a transplant in the DeBeck area. So, and those sheep are still there. As a matter of fact, I saw some at the CPW Cameo shooting range. Pretty cool, right on the cliffs above the shooting range. Those sheep are right there. And then when I got to Middle Park, I inherited a project that was probably 20 years in the making to reintroduce sheep there. There was historic population in the Gore Canyon Radium area, and DWM, longtime DWM that was in that district kind of initiated the project to what do we need to do to get sheep back, because we have these historic records of them being there. And then there's a habitat evaluation. Does things change since those sheep were there? Habitat has changed. What do we need to do to make it more acceptable for sheep? And we implemented those. We had burns. We had mechanical treatments to remove the overstory of pinyon and juniper that had come up in the last 50 years. And then worked through the process to get on the list for trap and transplant. And again, this is over 20 years of the DWM and number of biologists.
It's a long, drawn-out process.
Biologists that came and went, one handed it off to the next one, and DWM's moved on, AWM's moved on. And
it's worth mentioning, you just said 20 years. We're talking about trying to bring wolves back in like 3, and with very little management opportunity for the agency to be able to do so. And go ahead, but I mean, just to make sure that people understand that reintroduction or introduction is not something that just happens overnight where you expect it to be able to just flourish and it all comes together and those pieces in the puzzle work for all aspects of it.
And everybody's happy and everything's a success.
Exactly.
Along the lines, I mean, we had pushback from within CPW that there's not enough habitat for those sheep. It'll never work. Well, what do we need to do? Let's do the habitat treatments. And so we did that. We moved on. Things worked out. We ended up doing 2 releases, and those sheep are flourishing down there right now. In my estimation, it's a success story because it's providing hunting opportunity for sportsmen. That's the population such that it can sustain harvest. The local newspapers, always have pictures of those sheep because they're visible. People can see them. They drive on the trough road between Kremling and Radium, and they see those sheep. Well, that's a pretty coul thing to be able to look back on and say I was a part of that, even if it wasn't just a small part.
So you living up there, being an area wildlife manager, being part of that, the initial process of that, and then watching that population flourish. You mentioned wolves are absent on the landscape, but are you concerned what wolf population growth could do to sheep populations in a specific area where they introduced wolves?
Absolutely. That's another set of teeth on the landscape. I mean, that lions take sheep. I mean, that's and now you're putting another big predator up there. And granted, they're missing on the landscape, but that's another impact. That's another thing to be concerned about when you're making license recommendations and things like that. I'm not aware of the wolves having taken any sheep, but that's a. But
you got 10 wolves or whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever, and they dispersed. I mean, I'm not privy to locations, but those wolves were actually released pretty close to where we released those sheep.
Exactly.
So yeah, as a biologist, a concern from my involvement that, hey, we worked pretty hard to get those sheep on there, and then we put a predator right on top of them.
What would be your answer to somebody that said, who's naive or a non-hunter that doesn't understand about all of wildlife management? Why would you hunt the state animal?
Well, and as a sportsman, as a hunter myself, is like, that's. I'm sorry, you don't understand that, but it's the same reason why I would hunt a snowshoe hare.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of my DNA. I mean, I grew up hunting, and it's important to me to have hunting in my life, and sheep, elk, moose, deer. It's all part of that. And sheep, as long as it's not going to impact the population, and you need to come back to that as a biologist, is because our concern always is about the population. Day one in college, biologists are concerned about the population, not individual animals. And you got to wrap your head around that right away, that, well, they've got big brown eyes and they're cute, and I enjoy seeing them in pictures, but they also are a challenge to a sportsman to be able to harvest one. And the meat that I've eaten from bighorn sheep is some of the best. that I've ever had. And why wouldn't, if it's not going to hurt the population, why should we not allow it?
Just because somebody doesn't want it.
Because one person doesn't want it.
Yeah. And so on the sheep side of things, do you got any numbers in your head about how the population was in 1990 statewide versus what it's supposed to be now?
No, I'd be guessing at that stuff. But I can say, I mean, just what I was involved in my 30 years. I mean, I just mentioned two different populations
mm-hmm.
that were not on the landscape before we did transplants, and
mm-hmm.
that's two areas that I happen to have worked.
And some user groups or some advocates out there might think that maybe CPW needs more sheep, or maybe they need more moose, or maybe they need more goats. And it's not just as easy as to turn around and say we need more of this. And to your point, Lyle, the habitat, the pressure, the social component, the human dimension side of things, the landowner perspective, other populations or whatever, they all play into each other. And so while you consider something for bighorn sheep, maybe moose have moved in there and changed the landscape.
And I can speak to moose as well. I was fortunate enough on the Grand Mesa to be a part of that moose introduction
mm-hmm.
project up there, and that one it didn't take 20 years to get it done. I was there for the concept, the idea that hey, we should have moose on the Grand Mesa. It came from concerned citizens. They said, it looks like great habitat. What do you guys think? And so we came up with a plan, and it's not just moose would be great because then we could hunt them and people can see them, but there's ag producers on the Grand Mesa as well, and they don't know what that impact of another big herbivore is going to be on them trying to produce cattle mm-hmm. on that area. So we had public meetings and we tried to address that. We took a tour with ag producers through the Habitat Partnership Committee on the Grand Mesa, went to Walden and met with ag producers in Walden. And Walden's the center of moose in the state. That's mm-hmm. where they were first introduced, and where those ag producers have been dealing with moose for the longest. And figured, let's let them, instead of us telling them it's going to be okay, let's let another ag producer tell them how they deal with them.
Exactly.
And so it ended up being a couple-year process instead of 20 years, but then we released moose on the Grand Mesa. And again, it's a success story. They have hunting licenses on them, and people can go see them. CPW has a annual Moose on the Mesa weekend, with viewing opportunities and opportunities for people to come and it's like a festival.
Something like deal. They got in Walden and North Park up there. I mean, there's the moose capital of the world or whatever.
Moose viewing capital of Colorado. Yeah, by legislative declaration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So from your experience, and the way that you saw things kind of happen differently, because you were on the Front Range and watched the exponential growth with Colorado Springs and, the Denverites moving down and Colorado Springs people moving up and just people moving in. Then you move over to the western slope at Palisade, and then you go to the middle part of the state. Is it different from a management perspective in your mind about how people perceive wildlife and how it needs to be managed?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, night and day. I mean, it was a huge shift in thought process going from Colorado Springs to Western Slope, Palisade. I mean,
and you had sheep in all three locations.
Yep, absolutely.
Once you reintroduced in the Kremlin area.
Yep, absolutely. But those sheep in Colorado Springs were probably not visible to the bulk of the population in Colorado Springs. They knew about them, and we would
by Garden of the Gods.
Yeah, by Garden of the Gods, pretty limited. But a different attitude altogether on the Western Slope. Big change in philosophy and how things are managed.
And it's probably a little bit different too, that a lot of folks might not realize is the agriculture concern about the bighorn sheep. Bighorn sheep advocates are concerned about domestic sheep. Domestic sheep are on the landscape when it comes to grazing, whether it's on federal land or state land or whatever. You don't have that as much on the eastern side of the state. You do in the middle part and the western side. So I think from my perspective, the unknowing individuals would be more agriculturally based on the west side than on the east side, because you don't have as much agriculture that's going to be that cross connection, that cross pollination, so to speak.
Yeah, and none of the areas that I worked had large sheep producers, but one of the committee assignments I had in my career was working on it was a working group between sheep producers and CPW and sheep advocates, and that's a big subject. That was a big room with.
It's kind of like getting wolf advocates and non-wolf advocates in there.
Exactly, and it's a tough deal. And those domestic sheep producers, they don't want to see a conflict with. They enjoy bighorn sheep as well, but they also. This is an impact on their livelihood, and my experience is they're very interested in maintaining that bighorn sheep are on the landscape and trying to resolve conflicts that happen between their domestics and bighorns.
Where do you think Colorado's going as far as sheep management over the course of the next 10 or 20 years?
We've had our sheep biologists, sheep experts say that we're probably where we can tolerate the numbers of sheep are good, and without having conflicts or trying to expand the population into areas that are maybe marginal habitat.
And do you think that that sheep could eventually become the population damaged with too much predation, too much predator management? That's non-existent.
Yeah, no, that's it. They're susceptible to predation, certainly. And the desert bighorns in the canyons of western Colorado certainly found that. Lions get pretty good about figuring out how to kill sheep.
Yeah, and while listeners to this particular podcast might know the difference, can you briefly explain what your understanding of the difference between desert bighorn, Rocky Mountain bighorn, and how those can commingle together, or how they actually became to be two different species in the state?
Well, and I'm a little shaky on the history in Colorado, but I think there probably was evidence that deserts occurred in small numbers in southwest Colorado. They're a sheep species that's adapted to more arid environment. Pretty interesting. That due to that, their breeding cycle is entirely different than Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, because their breeding cycle and the time that have the lambs on the ground is coincided to be when there's moisture, obviously from that environment. But that's they're one of 4 bighorn sheep species in and I should say the Rocky Mountain and desert bighorn actually have the name bighorn, but there's 2 northern species, the stone sheep and the Dall sheep, that we don't have in Colorado. But they're obviously very similar in appearance, but they're probably separated by geography and climate.
You weren't part of the original desert bighorn.
No
component, but you were around then.
I was around then. I think the first introductions were down around Durango, but we did have desert bighorns in the area that I worked out of Grand Junction, down by the Colorado National Monument, and those were from an introduction probably in the 70s or 80s.
And that population is far less populated than the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep.
Yeah,
and primarily because of the terrain.
Yep, probably the habitat that's available for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And out-of-state dollars that come into sheep management from like Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, which we're going to have a lady on, Jann DeMaske, on this episode as well. But the Wild Sheep Foundation, all of those conservation groups are intimately involved in trying to expand what their specific mission is, whether it's the bighorn sheep or you got the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation or mule deer. But I mean, the agency works with those conservation organizations on a variety of different levels, whether it's not just the funding, but it's actually the facilitation and implementation of enhancing those species and the habitats.
Yeah, collaboration on research and what research needs are and things like that. I mean, there's some very obviously very engaged, but some intelligent folks with those groups, with the Wild Sheep Foundation that are all about perpetuating sheep or preserving sheep on the landscape.
Do you see, Lyle, something that maybe the general sportsman or woman, or maybe just the general listener, the general wildlife advocate might not know about bighorn sheep, that if they do, they don't hear it often enough, that you think it needs to really be pounded through people's heads to get them to understand how fragile and volatile species are on different habitats and landscapes? Well,
that's the mantra. Habitat's the key, and bighorn sheep are probably as susceptible to habitat issues as others, but they have a link to the habitat that is in disease transmission. I mean, historically, sheep typically migrated throughout the year and didn't spend a lot of time on one particular part of the habitat. Mm-hmm. And when we have things like reservoirs and highways and subdevelopment and things like that
game fences,
fences that restrict those movements, they have to spend more and more time in one particular area, and that exacerbates the disease transmission thing, because lungworm, which sheep are susceptible to, has a intermediate host, which is a land snail that comes through their feces. So if you see sheep in an area that has a lot of sheep feces, the potential for that transmission to happen, instead of moving through the habitat throughout the year, they have to spend three out of the 4 seasons in one area. That has a potential to exacerbate that disease transmission.
Heavier concentration there.
Yeah.
Even though they might not be heavier on the landscape, they're heavier on that particular landscape.
In one spot, yeah.
And do you see something that could be done for enhancing the populations more than what CPW is doing? Or are we gotten to a point of saturation and exposure that just because of the human population, because of urban sprawl and the growth and stuff, people for so many years have said, well, they did this in Yellowstone, or this is what happened in Glacier.
Right.
Colorado as a whole is not Yellowstone and Glacier. And I think it's easy to say that, but you have to be able to recognize it.
Well, the important thing, and talking in sheep in particular, one, we have to identify habitat that is important to them, that they're using, and protect it. That we don't build a condominium complex in an area that the sheep are using, and then maybe we can expand on that. Maybe it's an area that they're not using right now, but if we did a habitat treatment, a burn or a cutting or something like that, and open up another another 100 acres for them to use, or maybe even as little as a migration corridor to get to another area, to allow them to be able to make those bigger movements across the landscape. To me, that's the key to future with bighorn sheep is maintaining that habitat.
What's your perception, or what do you think the agency's overall perception is on the influx or the detriment of outdoor recreation on specific? Elk are different, coyotes are different, mallard ducks are different. But when you get into mountain goats and bighorn sheep and desert bighorn and so forth, what does recreation play into the availability for those sheep to turn around and continue to procreate in a suitable level to where the managing agency is happy with that? Because recreation is a major component of wildlife management that they have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important. People think, well, I can take pictures of the sheep and it doesn't bother them. But even if they have to go off the ridge down to a gully to get away from somebody trying to get too close for a photo, that's not where they want to be, and particularly when you're talking about winter range stuff, that might be enough to tip them over to be able to make it through the winter or not, because they're not able to get that meager mouthful of vegetation that's gonna keep their body temperature up, or not have to deal with the stress of someone a cross country skier or a snowmobiler or somebody else, pushed them out of the optimal habitat.
And sometimes not even knowing they did it.
Exactly.
Is the thing. People say, well, I don't harass wildlife. Well, just by you being there could be harassment that you're not observant to.
Yep, exactly.
And the wildlife is the one that's going to turn around and feel it. And then the agency, the biologists, the scientists have to deal with some of those repercussions or the ramifications of things that are beyond their control, don't have anything to do with the hunting season, don't have anything to do with disease. It's just human activity on the landscape.
Yep. Yeah, and Colorado is Colorado. The people that come here, they come here because they want to recreate, and recreation has expanded. I mean, we used to consider ski areas to not have a huge impact on wildlife habitat because the recreational impact was only in the winter, right? And it's not winter range. You don't see deer and elk at 12,000 feet on 30% slopes or whatever. But what's going on ski areas right now? We've got mountain biking, we've got alpine slides, and it is summer range, and it is calving areas, and the agency is entertaining some research projects to see what the impact is on elk. We're seeing some of those areas where our elk survival, calf survival, is decreasing, and we're thinking maybe it's the mountain bikers that are in habitat that they weren't 20 years ago.
Calf recruitment on a lot of different areas for elk is something that's in concern, not just in Colorado but in other states. And as far as the sheep's concerned, from where you started at Radium and when you actually put sheep on the ground, how long did it get to the point to where you guys kind of took a sigh of relief and went, oh, well, we're actually making some significant headway? Or did you have a lot of hurdles in the process to get to that and wonder, did we do this right?
No, I think they took off pretty good, and we had good lamb recruitment, but we had radio collars on those that technology. That's another thing that changed in 30 years. The technology that we're able to use. I mean, we could see, what the survival is, and we could see that those ewes had lambs with them, in the spring, and get a good count because we were able to find those sheep and take a look at them. So yeah, we progressed to the point where we had the population that we felt could support some hunting. In the time frame that we expected, and I don't remember exactly, probably 5 or 6 years we were able to have a hunting license in that.
You mentioned something that I want to go back to, and primarily because it's on the coattails of 127. The antis that proposed trying to ban the harvest of mountain lions and bobcats recognize the fact that science provides a lot of value to management. Maybe not their ideology of management, but management. When you put collars on animals and you can track them, just like what they've got on wolves what they've done in multiple areas of the state in their big studies on mountain lions, what they've done on bobcats in the past, deer and elk, sheep, everything. It's funny to me that those same people don't want collars or tracking devices on dogs to turn around and go to be utilized in the pursuit of game, but it's okay on this if it's good for them. But in today's environment, tracking collars are a part of all management of wildlife in some capacity. And whether it's utilized to actually track an animal that you own, that you're in charge of, or to track one that's on the landscape to see what sort of travel that they do, just like you're seeing on the wolf issue in the Denver Post, once a week or once a month, there's the drainage map of where wolves have gone.
Yep.
Well, they have all of that. CPW has all that on bears and lions and elk and deer and sheep and everything else. It's just not so much publicized to the point because those aren't the controversial animals like the wolf has been. Do you have a crystal ball where you think some of this stuff would be able to go 20 or 30 years down the road to be able to track wildlife and to be able to see the interactions of wildlife? I mean, it's not going to be instantaneous, but it's going to have to progress at some point.
Well, I mean, just a comparison of what we had for radio collars in 1990 to what we have today. I mean, the collars historically were just a radio frequency, and it took a technician in the field with an antenna to get a couple locations from at least two different places to triangulate where that animal was. Today, the technology's advanced that they've got GPS transmitters in them, and they're actually bouncing locations off a satellite. So the biologist can sit at their computer and know exactly where those animals are. The technology has allowed the electronics to be such a small package that you can put it on a collar on an animal and not have an impact on the animal. The technology probably existed 30 years ago, but the collar would have weighed 60 pounds.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can only imagine that things are going to get better. I mean, the next thing is going to be cameras on those collars. That they can see what the interactions are. I remember a research project in Rocky Mountain National Park. The biologist was those sheep are very easily approached, and you could get pretty close to them. They were actually making notes on what those sheep were eating, what plants they were selecting. Well, if you got a sheep in a wilderness area that's in February 30 miles from a road and being able to see what they're eating, you can't do that now, but maybe you could if there was a camera on that collar. See what I don't know. That's my crystal ball.
Well, I think it's going to get better, and I think it's going to be more more divisive because certain segments of the human population, they don't want anything that's going to be other than what they want. And I think the wildlife advocates, that the sportsmen and women, are going to appreciate the value of that technology, and it's going to benefit and better wildlife populations down the road.
Let's go back to putting collars on lions, something that I think was missed in 127. The advocates for 127 were saying we don't want you to use hounds to harvest lions. Yet the research projects that give us all the information on lions came from hounds chasing those lions to put a radio collar on them. And within the agency has a high set of standards on what they can do to animals in a research project. And there's it's a committee made up of researchers in academia, and then within CPW it's called the Animal Care and Use Committee. And they don't let a researcher do something that isn't unethical or the benefit for what the cost is to get the research that they want. Well, that they wouldn't allow lions to be chased with hounds, to be tranquilized and collars put on them if it was not if it was an ethical overreach.
Exactly.
And so that's the thing that I got hung up on is advocates for 127 would say that sportsmen can't do that, but CPW can when we need to answer a research question. Well, the CPW didn't figure. They weren't the ones that invented hound hunting.
Right.
Yeah, CPW.
It's been going on for thousands of years.
Thousands of years, and I found it working on 127. I found a master's thesis that was out of your country in Canyon City in 1970, and they used local houndsmen to be able to put collars on, and the collars they were putting on those animals were rope.
Yeah.
With a tag on them.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah,
it was a rope collar with a brass tag.
Yeah.
So, way things have changed. I mean, that's putting 20 years further in front of my career, but that's the evolution of things. And to me, that's the cost benefit. And if it's something that we can do and it doesn't have an impact it doesn't negatively impact the population, then sportsmen should be allowed to do it.
Well, and too, I mean, if anybody's seen an elk or a moose get darted or jumped on from a helicopter, or you turn around and drop a net on a bunch of sheep, which I've been on with you and others, where you turn around and have 50 guys run in on top of sheep and grab them and start putting blinders on them and tying them up. I mean, the overall antis would look at that as cruel and inhumane treatment and punishment. That's part of being able to capture that data and create that tracking mechanism on the science-based side of wildlife management. And while maybe that doesn't happen to the extent that it used to, it still happens for a variety of different reasons, whether it's a trap and transplant deal, whether it's a data collection deal, whether it's just inoculation, or maybe it's a variety of different things. And I think that the average non-hunter, once they see the beginning to the end process of what it takes for wildlife management to succeed, that hunting is a vital role of that, and that the agency that supplies that mechanism, that conduit that's there, is the most important role. Because without hunters, you won't have those agencies unless there's some other sort of fictitious fairy dust that's put on something where they come up with some funding mechanism. But without the agency, there's not the science that goes in to be able to manage the wildlife appropriately, so you have hunting. They depend on each other intimately, and the anti-community is trying to take full advantage of that. They want to talk about the good stuff. They want to talk about the sheep at radium, but they don't want to talk about how those sheep were funded and how those sheep are managed and how those sheep continually to prosper. And they don't recognize that as part of the entire process. And I think that that's where we have an opportunity to talk to the non-hunting voting public to say, this is a holistic, organic approach at all aspects. And as you were part of this campaign for 127, 961 species of wildlife now, including wolves. And the majority of that funding comes from hunting and fishing licenses that don't have anything to do with other than the 78 game species of wildlife that licenses are sold for. That being said, that doesn't mean that you should pedestalize or bastardize or marginalize any one of those other species for a variety of different reasons. But it takes all of that to make it a big, giant puzzle to where you've got all those pieces of the puzzle fixed.
Yeah, the point there, we pointed out to the advocates for 127 that there's by removing lions from the definition of big game species, you remove the ability to reimburse a landowner for depredation. Mm-hmm. Oh, we'll just fix that. We'll fix that with legislation. Well, where does that money come from?
Yeah.
Does it come from sportsmen? Colorado's done a good job of their game damage issue. They realize that wildlife can have an impact on agricultural producers. Mm-hmm. And so they have a game damage system. Well, sportsmen pay money to buy licenses to hunt those animals, so that money should then pay for that reimbursement to producers. Well, when you remove them, then that isn't there. The
piece of the puzzle's gone.
And sportsmen maybe a little begrudgingly, but realize that hey, that's part of the deal. To have a healthy deer and elk population, we need our money needs to be used to pay for damages that they might cause in the winter on a haystack or alfalfa field in the spring.
Well, Lyle, I mean, and I know that with our friendship, we can probably call on you to come back on at any given time. On a parting shot at this point in time, you looking out the outside, looking into the glass house, so to speak, what word of advice would you say, not just to the agency and to the politicians and the non-hunters, But if you were king for a day, what would you like to see happen when it comes to Colorado's wildlife, based upon that your entire life and career has been trying to sustain and perpetuate that in some capacity? If you had your wish as a king for a day, what would you say you'd like to see happen?
Well, I guess intimately watching what's happened in the last 4 years with the Wildlife Commission is that make sure that the by statute, who is supposed to represent sportsmen actually represent sportsmen. That happens, and those people are advocates for sportsmen. And when questions come up, those the sportsman issues get a fair shake when it comes to it, instead of some of the stuff that we've seen where somebody is a sportsman's rep, wink wink. Mm-hmm. Sportsmen are sportsmen. We know if it walks like a duck and quacks, we know what a sportsman is.
Yeah.
We don't have to dig into their background to figure out, they bought a license when they were 14.
Exactly.
To figure out if they're a sportsman advocate.
Right.
And with the merger of the agency, if they're supposed to represent recreation, then they should represent recreation. They should be a hiker, backpacker. They should buy state parks passes. They should represent sportsmen, or they should represent recreationists. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with the legislature all the time, but those statutes came up for a reason.
You bet.
They have people from the East Slope and the West Slope. They have people that represent county commissioners. They have people that represent outfitters, and call a spade a spade. Let's have the representation that we're supposed to on that board. And then when these questions come up, and I know they're coming up, the next commission meeting, the
probably the next 12 commission meetings.
the CATS people have said we're going to be there, mm-hmm. because we didn't do so good, but we're going to go for the next thing, which is hounds. Mm-hmm. Look at all the facts. Don't just look at one opinion or 20 people that call in on a Zoom call. See who's there and listen to the arguments.
How many friends you still socialize with within the agency on a regular basis?
Quite a few, actually. I mean, there's friendships there that came about. I had a phone call while I was driving down here this morning. Talked to Bob Davies, a guy mm-hmm. that you know.
Yeah.
Hadn't talked to him in a while. There's
he probably found out you were coming on this podcast, didn't
he? No. Actually got a Christmas card from him, and I said, you know what? I need to reach out to people that are important to me. So mm-hmm. that's I made a phone call while I knew I had cell coverage. But there's other guys that I get texts from 3 or 4 times a week, if not a day. So yeah, no, the lifelong career, and you get friendships by being involved in the same stuff and going through adversity and good times and everything like that. So.
Well, if you're so inclined, we'd like to get you back on when we get our feet underneath our asses a little bit here, and we're trying to make an impact as far as messaging and collaboration, and to get people something to understand where we're coming from, not just in Colorado, but how that actually it spreads out into other western states and the nation. We saw that through Proposition 127. Thanking you for your involvement on 127 and stepping up and trying to belly up to the bar. And just be part of the process.
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll come back. I mean, let's arrange for better weather next time. So.
Yeah, it was a little tumultuous coming over today, wasn't it?
Yeah, but to go back to 127, something that I said again, a number of times, in meeting with people and doing reach out with candidate forums and things like that is, I was lucky enough throughout my career to work with mountain lions. I mean, I had tranquilized them when they were where they probably shouldn't be, in somebody's backyard in Colorado Springs, and interact where they interacted with livestock, and we ended up having to put them down, or we relocated them. Had incidents where lions were female was hit by a car and the cubs were hanging around, and we had to get them to a rehabber, and then we had to release them. And I had a great, opportunity to work with lions, a phenomenal, another iconic species. I think we started out with that. And I've never been a lion hunter. I never chose to lion hunt. Maybe I will next year. I don't know. But my career was representing wildlife and representing sportsmen. And as long as, we could hunt lions and not have a negative impact on the population, then, I'll fight to the ends of the earth to support somebody else's right to be able to do that. If it isn't me being the one that gets to do it.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate your friendship, appreciate the historied career that you've had and being part of what Coloradans, think the good, the bad, and the indifferent of whatever is. And, you said something that earlier, and to kind of wrap this up, game wardens in some people's eyes are just out to do one thing. And that's, in my mind, to manage the wildlife resource appropriately to where everybody, and the statute says, to where everybody in the state benefits, including sportsmen, including non-hunters, and for that matter, including anti-hunters, the way it's written.
Well, and it goes on to say people that visit Colorado that might enjoy that wildlife too.
Exactly. And so, the friendships I built up over the course of the last 45 or 50 years, they don't go unnoticed, and the remarkable relationships that I've been able to see and how that's been garnered into the professional advocacy and what happens on Colorado's resource management process. It happens in every state, and whether a guy's in Utah or Nevada or New Mexico, it happens there as well. And I just want to thank you for coming on and being a part of our early process of the Through the Gates podcast and continuing to help CRWM save the hunt here in Colorado. And we look forward to further interactions and engagement.
Sure. No, I appreciate I could mirror the same words. Thanks for your friendship, and thanks for thinking of me to be able to help out. I'm glad I could do it.
Thank you very much, Lyle. Lyle Sidener, Area Wildlife Manager, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, retired in 2020. If you want to support a company that supported the efforts to defeat Proposition 127, then you need to support Davis Tent. Davis Tent has provided quality canvas goods for outdoorsmen for the last 50-plus years. For more information, go to davistent.com. If you want to support another business that was instrumental in helping us defeat Proposition 127, check out Salida Gun Shop. Salida Gun Shop in Salida, Colorado provides quality products, expertise, and knowledge from individuals that actually do what they sell. Go to salidagunshop.com. Listen to the advice of Cameron Haynes and support companies that are supporting your cause and your efforts. Minturn Anglers is one of those companies. Minturn Anglers provides product and fishing excursions in Colorado and are second to none. For more information, go to minturnanglers.com. Well, we want to welcome our second guest for the episode, and we've got in the room Jann DeMaske. We just had Lyle Sidener on, a former area wildlife manager for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and we discussed a lot of different things that Lyle's been a part of, and we kind of got into a little bit of Proposition 127 and sheep management and Lyle's historied career that he had with CPW. And you start talking about the North American model of wildlife conservation and how it translates into science-based wildlife management. And Lyle and I mentioned that it all connects for a reason, but you have to have sportsmen and women to be part of that, and you have to have game managers to be part of that, and you have to have organizations to be part of that, because all the funding just doesn't come from hunting and fishing dollars. It actually comes from organizations that provide a significant amount of that funding through either their raffles or their auctions, or when they supply different grants to organizations, and not just in Colorado, but in all game agencies in some capacity. In your case, you're involved with the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society and the Wild Sheep Foundation. So, Jann, would you mind introducing yourself and give us a little bit of background of who you are and what you do, and then we'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the stuff.
Well, Jann DeMaske, Windsor, Colorado, originally Wyoming girl, and Colorado now for like 45 years. Nurse by original trade. Now I don't know what my title is. I was a stay-at-home mom, and now I spend a lot of time doing sheep shit. I was with the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society for 9 years, and now Wild Sheep Foundation. They're part of our family. The Wild Sheep Foundation, for sure. We spend our family spends a ton of time doing sheep conservation. So.
And your daughter does?
My oldest daughter, Madeline, is an attorney for SCI, Safari Club International. And then our youngest daughter is also a conservationist with us. She's a worker bee with me when it comes to, the events that I help plan. And then my husband's a crazy sheep hunter. He and Maddie have hunted all over the world. As a family, we've gone all over the world hunting. So hunting and fishing
and it's not just a hobby for you. The entire concept of hunting and fishing and outdoor recreation is not just a hobby. It's who you are. It's what you live and breathe.
It's our way of life. If when our kids were little, they had a fishing pole in their hand, or they were out, doing something outside. And in the fall, we would go antelope hunting or deer hunting. We didn't take the girls elk hunting until they were probably 12 and 13. And then we all had cow tags, and all of us girls got, 3 cows in 5 minutes. And then poor Jeff had to take care of it. But it's part of what we do. It's every vacation we do has hunting and fishing involved. We don't go anywhere where we're not, doing something outdoors around the world, or if we go to Wisconsin, we're fishing, maybe some whitetail in the fall, but it's what we do. It's what I did as a kid. We would go antelope hunting when my dad would have vacation time. We would go antelope hunting, or we would go deer and elk hunting, fishing all the time because it was cheap, and you can take little kids. It was just it's just part of our family makeup.
How long have you been hunting yourself?
I didn't hunt with my parents. I would go along. So from the time, I remember being small enough to sit in the back of my grandpa's Scout and sit in the tire. So far back memories. But probably my first big game hunting was, I was probably 22, 23.
And what's your favorite species to pursue, personally?
I would say my sheep hunt was probably what I'm most proud of. But I love to go out to Kansas, and we have a ranch out there, and we whitetail and mule deer hunt out there. And it's just really cool because we see the animals from, maybe years past. And, we'll say, oh, no, that buck's only 3. He needs to, keep growing. But that's probably my favorite because we are out there as a whole family. I cook for everybody for, 2 weeks. I don't stay out there that whole time, but Jeff does. And buddies come and family. The girls this year got to each spend time with Jeff. I got to spend time with just the two of us, which we don't do very much. And so I would probably say the mule deer and whitetail.
And just a little bit of a historical deal. You and I became acquainted almost a year ago.
You're hooped. You're my friend.
Yeah, it's wrangled in, but vice versa. But just about a year ago, we met at Wild Sheep in Reno. As I was there to turn around and try to start building the armament up to defeat Proposition 127. At the time, it was Initiative 91. But you introduced yourself to me. I didn't know you. You didn't know me, but you saw me speak with Robbie Kroger with Blood Origins on some of the Lionheart stuff that they were doing at Wild Sheep. Tell us a little bit about what Wild Sheep is and why you reached out.
Well, I'm on the board of the Wild Sheep Foundation, have been for a couple of years. And sheep is, I love wild sheep. There's no creature that I think is more majestic than a wild sheep. And I think that's really why I put my time and effort there. And also, both Jeff and Maddie love to sheep hunt. And so originally it gave me that connection where, when you've been married a long time, sometimes you have to, find things to talk about, and especially once the kids get older, you have to figure out, okay, we're not going to talk about the, kids in school or what they're doing. So I decided to start volunteering for sheep. And it actually started, I bought the Colorado raffle tag. That was back in the big Chardonnay drinking days. And I love an auction, and I just kept raising my hand. And Jeff turned around and he said, I don't want that tag. And I said, it's not for you. I'm going to, and I had no business sheep hunting, but I was like, I can do this. If all these other guys can do it, I can do it too. And so I bought the Colorado tag, and Terry Meyer from RMBS came up to congratulate me. And I was thinking, what did I just do? I can't believe I just bought this tag. And he said, so he filled me in on, you need to take the sheep and goat class. And he was just filling me in on RMBS. And next thing you know, he said, why don't you volunteer with us? And I'm thinking, well, my girls are older. I don't really have, I have the luxury of time. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, why not? And so I did my, I was trying to get ready for the sheep hunt, but I didn't do a very good job. We were scouting all over the place, and I had the luxury of any open unit because it was the auction tag. And in the middle of that, there was an RMBS election for the board. And I think it was name recognition, mm-hmm. Because both, Jeff and Maddie are such, crazy sheep hunters. And we had been going to Wild Sheep Foundation to the sheep show for some time at that point. So I got on the RMBS board, and then I killed my sheep, and beautiful sheep, only sheep I have. But it is probably my proudest animal. It was pretty cool. And so I just put my heart and soul into RMBS because, again, my girls were old enough. They didn't need me day to day. They didn't need me to take them to school. Then they went off to college. And so I still had, again, the luxury of time. And so just, threw myself into RMBS, became the secretary and did the banquets and bossed the boys around. They called me BB. They said it was Bossy Broad. I know what the second B was. And so then I timed out on the board, and I got appointed to the Wild Sheep Foundation board. And again, it was just something that I just love these animals. And so my part is to conserve and to, hopefully increase the population, because hunting is part of conservation. Mm-hmm. And, but sheep tend to be a little fragile. And so we have to really work hard at conserving them. But again, part of our mission, both RMBS and Wild Sheep Foundation missions are, hunting as part of the conservation.
With your involvement and sheep being at the top tier, why did you reach out to me on the mountain lion issue then?
Well, two things. I'm pretty good at throwing parties, and I thought that I could help you raise money by throwing a party. And secondly, the situation we have in Colorado is terrifying. What the anti-hunting groups are trying to do in our beautiful state is unbelievable. It used to be when I was a kid, Colorado and Wyoming were the hunting and fishing mecca. Mm-hmm. And now I hear people say, when I say, oh, I'm from Colorado, they'll say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad. And even though being a hunter isn't in my top 10, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a gardener, I do all kinds of other things, but I'm a conservationist. And they're making, the political environment in Colorado is making it very difficult. We're vilified all the time. And I'm proudly a hunter. I just don't do it that much. But I spend a great amount of time on wildlife conservation. And so it was I think I was surprised, and I thought, all right, if not me, who's going to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And not like I did a ton, but it was just like, jump in. If you see a problem, you jump in. And that's the way, I've always been. And that's the way I was raised, is if there's an issue, you either volunteer, it's that old, what is it? Shut up or
Put up.
Yeah, shut up or put up. And, that was the kind of family I was raised in. And that's the way we raised our children, is don't complain unless you're willing to jump in. And so I found myself kind of complaining about the whole, mountain lion, bobcat, and lynx. And I thought, well, all right, I'm just going to walk up to these men at the sheep show and say, hi, I'm Jann DeMaske. I have a trophy room. You want to have a party?
No, and it's been much appreciated, and I want to emphasize how much I appreciate the friendship, and to see the passion that you bring to the table, not just for what we were doing on 127, but to see the respect and the admiration that you bring to the table from the community as a whole, and because of not just because of who you are, but because of what you do. You just said it. You put up or shut up, and I think that one thing that the lion deal started out as is a lot of people from sheep and from elk and everybody else said, yeah, it's a lion deal. Yeah, it's, good luck. Sorry, we killed a lion. We don't really need to worry about that anymore. But as you and I have started to become more involved with the whole process and program, you started to buy into what we were saying from the campaign about. Absolutely. It's not just about mountain lions. It's not just about bobcats. Not just read the language that's being produced. Listen to the message that the opposition, that the antis are actually, spewing from their mouths. And then about August to September, they started spewing it to the point to where people didn't have to listen to me say it. They saw them actually do it. Give me a little bit of a background of what you saw when some of that language came out about them calling individual groups out besides lion hunters.
Well, and that was the crazy thing. And, just to go back a little bit, I didn't understand the process at all. And so I had the luxury of having an attorney as a daughter who was explaining the okay, first we're going to do the title. Mm-hmm. And the amount of time and effort and energy and money that went into, creating the title that didn't include trophy hunting. Mm-hmm. And then the legislative language. And so, and then I remember the first time you invited me to the down to the Capitol. I'm like, well, I can't go down to the Capitol,
yeah,
and you were like, yeah, you can.
I'm like, you're not a felon packing a gun or anything.
Exactly.
Anybody can go to the Capitol.
And so just to learn this whole process. And so then I my family got so tired of hearing about mountain lion, bobcat, and lynx, and that you're reading every little thing you got. And then next thing you know, they're talking about bighorn sheep. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about, bighorn sheep aren't doing great, so maybe that's the next thing we look at. Mm-hmm. And then they call out Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society. They called out Wild Sheep Foundation and, talked about the, these big bad trophy hunters.
The dark money and the money that's coming in to support additional trophy hunting.
And to call it trophy hunting, in the fall, you always get to see the great pictures. And, on Instagram, I love when you see a young person who has their first doe or, a cow elk. And that's as much of a trophy as a 180-inch buck. Mm-hmm. I can tell you exactly what my ram scored. But I can also tell you that he was old and had, his teeth were down to nubs and he wasn't going to survive. That to me is a trophy. When any of us get home from a hunt, it's always a joke. Oh, whose was bigger or something like that. But we love an old animal. Somebody who's a male animal who's not, he's not breeding anymore.
They've been ostracized a lot of the time.
Exactly. And, that's what is so cool. But people don't understand that. And the anti-hunters definitely don't understand that. They see a head on the wall and they think, oh, that's your trophy. It's like, That's not the trophy. The trophy is who I went with, the hunt itself.
The preparation.
Oh my
I mean,
goodness!
you explain real briefly. I mean, when you drew your sheep tag, how long in advance did you have to prepare to go on that hunt?
Oh, it was a good 6 months, and you're hiking because you might be at 12,000 feet. The year before, I actually got a mountain goat, beautiful nanny, and I worked my ass off. I was on the top of Mount Evans, and if you don't think that's a hard hunt, you put it wasn't a huge pack, but it was a 40-pound pack plus your rifle. And then you hike your happy ass up Mount Evans, and you're going to see what hunting's like. You're not driving up and shooting an animal at 10 yards, but that's what the anti-hunter would like.
Just like they said on the mountain lion deal, the drunken disorderly hunter, gets out of his truck and walks to the tree and shoots the lion out. Where nothing could be further from the truth.
Nothing can be further from the truth. And I met so many beautiful houndsmen when during this whole process, and a couple of gals who I think will be lifelong friends who are houndsmen, and just their passion for their dogs, for the mountain lions, for their family, on how they do this as a family, and how few times they actually shoot an animal. And honestly, we spent probably about 3 weeks in Kansas. And there were a lot of days where you're like, oh, he's too young, or he needs to grow a little, age a little, So it's not about the shooting. It's about all the other stuff.
It's the culmination of efforts. I mean, the harvest of culmination of efforts in strategy and preparation and license acquisition, whether you apply, whether you're lucky enough to get one out of a raffle or an auction like what you talked about. But I do want to mention, explain real briefly, because you're on both sides of the aisle, the money that was expended on that auction hunt, where's that money go? And the organizations that actually help do that money comes into them and to the management of sheep at a different level.
Absolutely. So I think it's every 3 or 4 years, the different organizations, the different NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they put in for these auction and raffle tags. So they go to the state here in Colorado. They go to the state and they do a request for proposal, and they tell the state, this is how we propose to do it. And Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society has the raffle and the auction tag for sheep. And so then they take it to Wild Sheep Foundation, because at the sheep show, it historically brings the most money. And that's what it's really about, because then that money is going to go to the sheep, to the sheep habitat. For instance, in Vail, we had the Vail Bighorn Initiative. And the sheep are in an area that's their winter range. And part of the money that's raised went towards those sheep, but also went to the fight to keep that winter range sacred. So to keep it from being developed, to keep it from, having houses built there. And so that's some of the things, in southern Colorado. They do guzzlers because there's not enough water for the,
explain what a guzzler is.
So a guzzler is basically a huge stock tank, but it's built, and it's, depending on where it's at, it might be just a rain collector, or it might be irrigation water that goes into that, huge stock tank. And they're all over the world. And they come from the conservation organizations in conjunction with landowners and outfitters and other organizations and habitat industry leaders and the managing agencies within those states. Absolutely. And that it's a collaboration. And that's what's so cool is when, you see like for instance, the guzzler, you have volunteers that are helping. You have CPW that's helping. You have Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society. And even though it's meant probably for sheep, you have Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. You have the mule deer guys. it really, when it comes to this stuff, it is a huge collaboration. We all have our own little territory and have our egos. But when it really comes down, just like with 127,
Really comes down to it.
it was so cool to see. So I met people from all different, trappers and houndsmen. I'd never met a houndsman.
Because you're a sheep hunter.
Yeah, because I'm a sheep hunter.
And
But just to meet all the different people and just sit at the Capitol and see, holy buckets, these are sportsmen.
That's a key word, and that was one of the key phrases that Sean and I. And Sean, would you mind popping up the RMBS website and then into the wild sheep? There you go. If anybody has any inclination to join or get involved, it's whether they're sheep hunters or not, they're conservationists and they're sportsmen and women. And I think that was one of the biggest things that we actually looked at when we were doing what we were doing is when we first started, and I talk about this previously, that when Santino Castellanos put me on a podcast back in November, December of 23, when we first started this whole process, we were going through the title board, the Secretary of State, and the Supreme Court. He said, just talk. I mean, you're good at talking. You can always talk. But I said something that has resonated so well with so many different people, and I said, I'm a sportsman. I'm a sportsman that bow hunts, and I'm a sportsman that traps, and I'm a sportsman that hound hunts. And that message in itself, I started to see how that helped collaborate and coalesce so many different entities immediately. When I was asked to go to wild sheep, and with Kim Needers was more than accommodating to turn around and put that hunt that we got from the Hill Ranch on the auction block. You guys already had your books made up. You already had all your auction stuff together.
And she just added it.
She just added it, and she said, we have to support this. We have to support you because this is a sportsman issue. This is a conservation issue. It's not a sheep issue. It's not an elk issue. It's not a lion issue. And then when we did these other shows and all these fundraisers and events and conventions and social interactions and stuff, people started identifying themselves without poking and prodding. I'm a sportsman. And that was enlightening enough to me to the point where I thought, well, maybe my dumbass one time can do something that people can fall in line with and say, I am part of the group. I'm not this side of the group or that side of the group. I'm part of the group. And I think that sportsman umbrella that we created really, really resonated so well because then you saw the organizations like with Wild Sheep and RMBS and Rocky Mountain Elk and SCI start to put money into a mountain lion and a bobcat deal because it was much more than a mountain lion and bobcat deal. And everybody saw that if sheep is doing this, if elk are doing that, if turkey is doing this, if deer is doing this, maybe I should do some of this. And look, I'm 60 years old. I haven't seen that sort of collaboration and that collaborative movement for people to make that decision themselves by just hearing it several times. They made it themselves, and then they wanted to be part of the movement. They wanted to be part of the clan. They wanted to be part of the sportsman group, even though they were sheep hunters or they were upland bird hunters. Maybe they were falconers.
Or maybe they were like me and they were a mom who supports a hunter. Or, I hunt very casually. Don't know that I'll ever hunt again. I will go. Mm-hmm. I'll go a lot. But as far as will I shoot a deer? Not sure, but I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And I think that was the cool thing about 127 is that there were, moms, people who had nothing to do with hunting, but had that respect for it and realized that this is part of our tradition. This is part of our, cooking. You come to my house and you don't know what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. Like right now, there's in the freeze, there's, caribou, deer, bighorn sheep. I think there's some fish in there from last year, but you don't know what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly people are like, oh, wait, this is what DeMaske's do. Oh, this is what the Gates family does. Mm-hmm. And it changes the way people think because they realize, wow, this is bigger than sportsmen. It's about supporting our sportsmen and looking at it and I think that's why 127 was so cool. When we were at the Capitol and there were little kids passing out stickers, it was fantastic.
You felt like you were part of a team, and felt like you were a part of a community. And while you might disagree on different things when you go to the legislature or you go to the commission or you turn around and try to, enhance one license opportunity or one method of take over here, you're not enemies. The enemy is not within our circle. The enemy is on the outside. And it's worth mentioning over and over and over again. Because of what we got to see, the true colors from the enemy through Proposition 127, they kept saying, this is only about mountain lions and bobcats. It's only about fair chase. It's only about ethics. It's only about humaneness. And then they came out and showed their true colors by saying, oh, well, it's also about the bighorn sheep trophy hunters. It's about the trophy hunters of the world. It's about the elk trophy hunters. It's about the bear trophy hunters. Because they were trying to follow our message. And they're going to end up listening to these podcasts at some point in time. They despise me. They despise our effort. They despise CRWM. But they have to follow our message because their message is lies and deceit and falsehoods and fallacies. So they got to follow what's good and what works. And what works is conservation. So when it really gets down to it, they're not attacking one side of it. They're attacking all of it.
All of it.
Every single part of it. They want it to disappear.
And again, it goes back to that collaboration. And that's the only way we're going to succeed in keeping our tradition alive is collaborating. It doesn't matter if you're a rifle hunter or a bow hunter. I don't care if you hunt with a spatula. If we have to work together, period. That's it. That's the only way that we're gonna make this happen. And it's not just Colorado. They've already moved to Arizona, and they were in Washington. And the anti-hunting organizations are so well funded, and again on a lot of deceit. It's not about puppies in cages, but that's where your money is going, and they're terrifying. You look at, if you go on some of their websites and you look at how many attorneys they have, and
full-time staffers,
full-time attorney staff, and you're just thinking, what in the world? And the millions and millions of dollars they bring in every year. It's terrible.
And none of it, and it's worth mentioning, the millions and millions of dollars that are spent in conservation, like what RMBS and Wild Sheep Foundation does, with what you are part of. You're part of that distribution of money and the deciding factors of where money goes and how it's accumulated and what it needs to go for. The antis don't do any of that. They don't put any money into the conservation or to the habitat unless it's something they want to turn around and try to stop on the back end of it.
Or put their name on something, put their logo on something.
Yes.
That seems to be terribly important. You see people that, they'll donate money, but boy, they do a splash of it. Very few hunters will say, this is how much money I've spent. And it's not because they're embarrassed. I think
it's part of the process.
It's just part of the process. And I think that if you look, hunters and anglers are of a humble breed. And you don't, you brag, but you don't brag about those kinds of things. There are people who are multimillionaires who've bought so many auction tags, but they don't say, oh, I've spent, I've put in $10 million to, whichever auction tag. But boy, if you see an anti-hunting organization, they are very specific on who donated and, how much they donated. And what I've found is, sheep hunters are a big pain in the ass and, they have big egos, but they're also a very humble group. And I would say that for most hunters and anglers. It's a different breed.
The system that's been created under the American funding system of wildlife conservation, under the North American model, to create the process and programs that we have, the historical side of that has gotten us to where we are at now. And I asked Lyle before you, when he was on, that if you had an opportunity to wish that you were a king or a queen for a day, what would you wish for? And he talked about wildlife commissions. He talked about the infiltration of the decision-making side of things. But the infiltration of the money side of things is probably what drives a lot of the infiltration of the decision-making side of things, because the antis continually make more money to more money to more money, and they actually make money on losing money. They lost this election here with 127, and I guarantee it's a boon for them a boom for them to be able to turn around and capitalize on. The sheep hunters of the world, the elk hunters of the world, do boots on the ground conservation efforts, and they don't try to pedestalize what they've done. They just do it.
They just do it.
Now
That's
they do a year-end report to their members or to the community that says that we did this and this is what we did with the money. But overall, it's not bragging. It's not a boisterous, candid display of machoism. It's we do this for the cause, and the majority of us are unsuccessful in our endeavors to try to go out and get what we pursue. Sheep hunters maybe are a little bit more percentage-wise successful than some other ones, just because of the time and the effort and the season length and maybe the limited amount of tags that are available.
For most people, it's a lifetime tag.
Exactly. And so I know guys, and I've drawn 2 sheep tags. I harvested 1 sheep. I opted not to harvest another sheep. I'll never draw another tag in the state of Colorado. But the guys that do this and have the resources or the time or the availability to be able to go to different locations, they spend, you talked about 6 months in the process to get ready for your 1 tag. Mm-hmm. Think of a guy who turns around and hunts 2 or 3 different species of sheep around the world in a year, and the time and effort and the money that goes into that, and depending on how that money is expended, it all goes back into sheep conservation. It all goes back into the management and the habitat. And I don't care whether you're in Azerbaijan or in the Kamchatka Peninsula or if you're in the Bighorn Rocky Mountains, the area, it all goes into the conservation of those animals. And the antis make you believe that the badass trophy hunters are out there and they're degrading and eroding and trying to extirpate an entire population.
Well, and it doesn't matter if it's sheep hunting. It's any hunting. We had, it was such a privilege. We were in Namibia, and Maddie harvested a hippo, and she got to go to the meat shack. And and they do it so well, it's in the Caprivi. She was able to be there for the meat distribution. So she's there, and widows and orphans are first. And that's biblical. Mm-hmm. And this little tiny woman came up and said she hadn't had protein for weeks and hugged Mad and just thanked her. And more and more, we see that, mm-hmm. Whether it be, in donating a deer, which unfortunately Colorado makes it very difficult. Wyoming does a much better job where they allow you to donate easily. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can donate in Colorado, but it's just very difficult. But that's what hunters do. And the amount of money and resources that go into that the hunters bring to the table. So, you spend the money on the hunt, and you're not you're not guaranteed. You're not guaranteed an animal. You're usually guaranteed a good time. Might be some blisters and, all kinds of other crazy things that happen. But what hunters do for all over the world for communities is pretty cool. Everywhere we've been, somehow it's benefiting a community, whether it be the young person who's a guide, that's their livelihood. And then they get a tip, and it goes to the restaurants. Yeah. And that was the thing with 127 that was pretty cool, is they said, look at what hunting brings in. Look at the dollars that this brings in. Hunters and bikers and hikers might pay, a parking fee, but they don't bring the money in. I mean, anglers bring in a crazy amount of money in the state of Colorado. And we have to have campaigns that say hug a hunter, mm-hmm. hug an angler.
To let people know that.
To let people know that, we're taking care of your snowmobile trail. It's not the snowmobiler, mm-hmm. it's the hunters and anglers that are taking care of the majority of our beautiful state.
And I think what what maybe goes unnoticed more often than not is all the good work that goes behind things. When you talk about organizations, and I continually reference who you're affiliated with, but RMBS and Wild Sheep, that's almost become like the diamond standard to a turkey hunter in Kentucky, or maybe to somebody that likes to hunt Coues deer in Javelina in Texas or New Mexico or whatever. It all works hand in hand with each other because of the different varieties of species and terrain and that we don't have as many sheep because we probably have never had as many sheep as what we did deer and elk or buffalo or antelope or anything else. But we have sheep in the regions and the areas that they can be in because of what we've done historically on the management side of things. We have different populations of sheep in North America. Lyle was on here earlier, and he talked about the Rocky Mountain Bighorn, the Desert Bighorn. He talked about the stone sheep and the Dall sheep. But Jann, how many species of sheep are there in the world?
Holy buckets, I have no clue.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I couldn't even tell you.
And there's probably an organization for each one of those species.
Absolutely.
Or each one of those regions. And even on the foreign level, they do things similar to what we've done. But the reason that they've done it was because of the conservation side of what was established under the North American model. 100%.
You look at Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. All of those, their conservation programs are not funded by the town. They're not funded by anti-hunting organizations. They're funded by hunting dollars. They're continually trying to assess how many, sheep or goat there are.
Exactly.
And, again, those dollars are coming from Wild Sheep Foundation, Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, auction tags. Somebody buys an auction tag for Tajikistan, that money goes to Tajikistan. It doesn't stay in the United States. It goes there to figure out how many, what do you have? How many Marco Polo? How many? For an example, I was fortunate enough, and because I get criticized from the antis about my bear claw, I hunted a brown bear on the Kamchatka Peninsula in 1998. And to see back then the money that went into the local economy underneath that particular regime in Russia, Boris Yeltsin was actually the president at the time. Wow. And but just to see how that money was distributed amongst everybody and how that helped them on a daily basis and a monthly basis and a yearly basis. But the kicker was, prior to where they started allowing non-resident foreign hunters to come in and harvest, they shot stuff at will. There was no value to it, so they killed it. If it was messing with their caribou herd, they killed it. Messing with their sheep herd, they killed it. Same thing in Africa.
Exactly.
When there's no value to it,
they kill it.
They just kill it.
And so now they see this value to where, okay, well, we might be able to sustain a little bit of loss if we turn around and promote the management and the conservation of those particular species. And it flows over into the moose and the sheep and the bears and all the other species in Siberia and the Asian side of things. The non-hunter in the United States or North America doesn't understand what we've done worldwide just based upon the North American model of wildlife conservation.
Well, look at Botswana. Botswana made hunting illegal, and they were going to create the funds from non-hunting groups. So people were going to go there and take take pictures and that kind of thing. And it killed them. They were like, oh, wow, look at the revenue lost. Mm-hmm. Because someone that goes there on a photographic safari is not going to put in as much money as somebody that's going in there for a regular safari. And
it doesn't come into the conservation management side of things as appropriately either. Things become more of a nuisance or a depredation or a human health and safety deal. So there's still an offtake, but it's not done from people paying to do it. There's people that are being paid to do it now because the money wasn't sustainable and the funding wasn't incorporated enough to be able to manage those species of wildlife.
And we really need to stay out of other people's business. You know, what people do in Botswana, let them, you know, if they want to hunt, let them hunt.
Yeah.
You know, and the U.S. is pretty known for that. Look what we did with the polar bear. You know, both Maddie and Jeff have hunted polar bear. And the number of bears that are in these pictures and the Nunavut people, they want the U.S. dollars. But people aren't going up there as much because you can't import them because the, you know, United States decided that it shouldn't be allowed. They're continually doing that where it's being fought
from groups like SCI.
Like SCI. You know, and that's something that Maddie works on is, you know, why are you saying this? Again, we've managed it. We found out how many Altai-Argali there are. There's plenty to be hunted and harvested and brought into the United
non-hunter
States.
that listens to this, what is an Altai-Argali?
It's this really cool animal from, is it Tajikistan? I mean, they're majestic, absolutely majestic. I probably got that wrong, but yeah, I never know which is from where.
Yeah. Well, and the kicker is too, all of this is circular. If you go to one of these conservation conventions, Dallas Safari Club, Wild Sheep, Western Hunt Expo, if you go to any one of these things, you run into people from around the world that are coming for the same reason. And it's not just to go out and try to kill something. It's based upon the conservation efforts, and to do that through the license mechanism and the funding component that's been established over the last 50, 80, 100 years, there is an offtake that's allowable under the North American model of species conservation, but the funding that goes into that makes that circular piece of the puzzle. It makes it all connect.
And if people would actually get the book and read all about the North American model, they would be amazed. Absolutely amazed. You know, and then you take the next step that Shane Mahoney did with the Wild Harvest Initiative. And, you know, he's looking at how much actual meat is taken. And it's unbelievable how, you know, between the, you know, the fish and the animals, the amount of food. And if you take that food away, where's it going to come from?
Well, what I've seen too, and specifically like as much advocacy work that I've tried to do in the last 15 years, that the average sports person understands this whole process. The average non-hunter does not understand how you could go to Tajikistan and hunt a sheep, or how you can go to Botswana and hunt an animal over there and not bring that meat back. Well, that's federal law because of transport of disease and different things that come into different countries. But that meat doesn't go to waste. That
doesn't
meat,
go to waste.
It goes to use, just like what you were talking about, the hippo. Or in other countries, they utilize that stuff. So the salvageability of what you bring home is, in a sense, the three-dimensional component that you end up sticking on your wall that's been bastardized as trophy hunting. But that same thing happens in Arkansas when somebody shoots a doe deer and they want their kid to turn around and have a memory of it, and the kid decides to mount it, or it's a wild hog or a javelina or whatever. What we've created is this optical illusion of what trophy hunting is and what it isn't, but it's been bastardized by the antis. And you can see that if you look into the sheep side of things, that's probably the next low-hanging fruit.
Absolutely.
Because the sheep aren't going to go kill kids in school. Sheep aren't going to turn around and create livestock depredation to people's livestock and create havoc on the landscape. So there has to be trophy hunting, doesn't it? It has to be. There couldn't be any other reason to be able to do it.
Other than it's delicious. I mean,
it's part of the model.
And it's part of the model. And if you don't hunt them, you know, when I was a kid, we were driving in Wyoming, and it was a very bad winter. And, you know, this is back in the 70s. And there were antelope that were stuck in the barbed wire fence. And I remember just crying. But they weren't strong enough. And really, they had not been managed well enough. There were too many antelope in that area. And I remember talking, we used to go up to Hyattville, Wyoming, and there was a lovely man who was the game warden at the time. And he said, we're not doing a good enough job. And he said, that's why you're seeing so many antelope along the road stuck in barbed wire. Mm-hmm. And so they've learned to manage it better in the last 50 years. And that's, again, it's part of it. I mean, there's lots of guys who all they want to do is hunt antelope, hunt deer. And, it doesn't, sheep hunters, we think we're so cool. But guess what? There's all kinds of other guys who are like, oh, deer hunting is the best, or elk hunting is the best,
yeah, but
or
when you
duck hunting.
When you go to the Sheep Foundation Sheep Show in Reno, everything's not sheep. I think that's the misnomer with people say, oh, that's the sheep show. Yeah, but it's all wildlife. It's just it happens to be run by a sheep organization.
Absolutely. And, that was what I think was pretty cool about the donation that Wild Sheep did to CRWM.
For 127.
Was it... You realized it was more than just sheep. Mm-hmm. And if you look at our auction items, African hunts, photographic safaris, deer hunts, we actually auction, several deer, elk, moose tags, because they realize that the sheep show is really where they're going to get the most money, again, for it to go to conservation. Mm-hmm. It's not going to the hunters. It's going to the management.
Do you have a statistic in your head? How much money did wild sheep kick out in the last year?
Shoot.
It wasn't it $7 or $8 million or something like that?
And
or maybe more.
So we do something at Wild Sheep. It's called the Grant and Aid Program. And I think it was almost $2 million. So the board of directors, we get different programs that somebody wants to, either do research on, or, like for instance, the Vail Initiative, mm-hmm. the Vail Bighorn Initiative. They wrote a grant for it, and then we fund it the best we can all across the world, mostly North America, some stuff in Mexico, Canada, the U.S., and the amount of money, and so it was only $2 million that we were able to do, and is our goal to keep funding more and more and more. But the rest of it goes, is programs that aren't part of the grant program, but that are just automatically funded. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of money is raised, a crazy amount of money.
Is it One Campfire?
One Campfire.
Explain that.
So One Campfire is my favorite committee. It's actually through Wild Sheep Society of BC. And when British Columbia lost the grizzly bear hunt, they decided, okay, we're in trouble. And we're never going to get the guys that are on the far right or the far left. It's that in-between voter. And that's really what 127, I think that's how we were able to defeat it, mm-hmm. is we got those middle-of-the-road guys. Yeah. And so that's what One Campfire is all about, is it's taking away the stereotypes of the hunter. We talk a lot about the hunting with your children, the food recipes, but it really is geared towards that middle of the road person who maybe you're a vegan. We've done some podcasts and videos of vegan to hunter, mm-hmm. Where you see someone getting a respect for, wow, okay, I get it.
A little bit different.
Yeah. And again, it's where people don't understand. They don't realize that, I met a woman at my Bible study, and she said, so you're really a hunter? And I said, oh, very proudly. And I'd actually made breakfast the week before. And she's just like, oh, I just don't know how you do that. And I said, do you remember the breakfast casserole last weekend? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, that was deer. And she's like, I've never eaten wild game.
Well,
and I said, I said, what'd you think? She said, it was delicious. I said, thank you. Mm-hmm. And I said, if you ever see my name on a dish and there's meat in there, most likely there's going to be wild game. And so that's what we're going for, is that group of people in the middle who, when it comes to hunting or it comes to, our policymakers making these decisions, if they're going to make it for all of us, you can't make it just for the guys on the left or the guys on the right. It has to be for all of us. And so that's kind of what One Campfire is about. It's a social media campaign. And so as a hunter, you've probably never seen it because we're not trying to get to you.
Well, that's a perfect segue into a comment that during 127, our community said, "Well, I'm not seeing your message. You're not the target audience.
You're not the target audience.
If you're not a woman between 18 and 44 living on the Front Range with 2 kids that drives an electric vehicle or it has a soccer background or something, you're probably not the target audience. We're not advertising to the 65-year-old guy who's a sheep hunter or a deer hunter or an upland bird hunter. We want them on our side, but we don't have to convince them. They're already on our side.
They're already on the side.
You're trying to turn around and talk to the people that aren't on your side.
And that's the funny thing with One Campfire is we have, some naysayers who are saying, well, what good does this do? Well, I have to say that I've used 127 a lot lately where it's like, this is why we do it. This is why we have One Campfire. And while One Campfire is mostly in British Columbia, social media is, worldwide. And so, we're moving this direction. But for British Columbia to lose the grizzly hunt, and again, it's politics. And they have the same kind of crazy politics we have in Colorado. And if we don't watch it, if you don't look at the legislative language, pay attention, read it. How many people vote and just
check the box?
Just check the box and have no clue what they're actually, in Colorado we get this beautiful blue book that explains it. Read the damn book. And we've become so lazy, and that's part of the problem. Is you hear the anti-hunting argument, and they're united. They are truly
and there's not very
united.
many of them. It's just that they're loud.
They're loud,
and they're persistent, and their argument is to try to. If you say a lie enough, people start to believe it. And we were able to counter the lie by the experts that we had. Lyle was one of those that were just in here, and just to be able to counter that. But we have to be able to counter that when it comes to elk and sheep and everything else, not just on lions. It has to be on all game species that are allowed to be hunted under science-based wildlife management because we have the facts, we have the data, we have the statistics.
Well, look at lynx. When they added lynx, that was just a BS, let's just add it because...
You might as well add it orangutans.
Right. And so it's like, it's so beautiful. Well, you can't hunt it. But again, that was part of the lies.
Part of the lies that they built, and I think that message, it translated over into the sheep community and the elk community and the upland bird community that I constantly talk about. But it translated over to them to where they even said, those guys, hey, wait a minute, we need to start talking to people that maybe think that we're bad because the lies are being told about us. We need to start talking to our neighbor and our congregation and the coworkers and the friends and family. I think that what we did on 127 built up something that was positive for all of us to turn around and support and feed off of. And now that we actually won by 10.5 points, which is monumental in today's election cycle, that it gives us some solace and some enthusiasm and some optimism on what we could do to be able to carry on a message to the non-hunting target audience, because we don't need to be talking to ourselves. We just need to keep them motivated to participate.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is that lost that train of thought. Completely went out my
That's all right.
out my ear.
You came from the flatlands to the high
I did,
elevation
yeah.
up here,
It must be altitude sickness or something. What were we talking?
Jann, from your involvement with RMBS and wild sheep, what do you think could be done better from an organizational standpoint? Not to criticize, but maybe there's hurdles in the way from administrations or policy setters or the politics side of things. What could be better?
It goes back to the C word, collaboration. That's it. Put the ego aside, and we must collaborate. I'm part of this really cool group. I volunteer. It's called Serve 6-8. And what they do is they bring in all the resources into, this huge area, and they bring in the food and the toys and whatever, and then they put it out to whoever has the greatest need. So let's say, Timberlane Windsor is our church, and they need diapers. Okay, so instead of it being everybody gets diapers, you only go to whoever needs it. So imagine if all this money that was raised went into, everybody worked together instead of it being the rifle hunters or the bow hunters or the sheep hunters, where it was, okay, who's in trouble? Who needs us? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what 127 did. Charlie Kelly from Arizona,
Yep.
He was the one who at the board meeting, he said, here I am sitting there from Colorado, and I'm like, man, I'm not good about asking for money. And so, Charlie's like, hey, Colorado needs us. Colorado needs us to donate money to the 127 cause. And it doesn't matter what it is. Okay, this time it was 127. Next it could be that you have, sheep and all kinds of wildlife in Arizona that are dying of thirst. And then we can all say, okay, this is where the problem is. And that's what it's going to take, is all of us working together.
But if you saw what they did in Arizona on December 6th, where Conserve and Protect Arizona saw that there was a petition coming from groups similar to what came at us, a petition to go to the Arizona Game and Fish Commission. And if you saw the testimony that was given throughout the state of Arizona at that commission meeting, virtually, it wasn't about one specific method of take except for the use of dogs.
Dogs, right.
And it was dogs for rabbits and dogs for squirrels and dogs for coyotes and dogs for lions and dogs for bobcats. The way that those people came out, they, if nothing else, they made the point to the Game and Fish Commission down there that we don't want this. We don't want to be like what Colorado was trying to get to from specific groups. And for those people that don't remember or realize, the first step here was through the Parks and Wildlife Commission. The second step, they went several times to the commission and were defeated unanimously. The next step was through the legislature here with the Colorado General Assembly back in 2022. Then they didn't like that answer, so they came to the ballot. Same playbook, same type of mentality, same people, same language, same strategy in Arizona. Let's go to the commission first. We get shut down there, let's go to the legislature. We get shut down there, let's go back to the ballot. And I think that if anybody is naive enough to think that it's not going to go further than mountain lions or bobcats with the utilization of dogs or hounds, I've said this before, and I think that you would agree. If people stood in front of Lowe's and Home Depot and Costco and all the big stores to get signatures to ban the harvest of our state animal, the bighorn sheep, that's on the logo of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, could they get enough signatures?
Absolutely, they could. Because they would. The reason they could get it is because we haven't done the educating.
I think you're exactly right. If they did it for deer and elk, to ban the harvest of deer and elk and lied about it, could they get enough signatures?
Absolutely.
I think that they probably could. And that's the thing, that building up this armament, this repertoire of collaboration from all of these organizations in this community. I made an analogy when I was doing all the podcasts during 127, and I was talking to sheep hunters and elk hunters and bird hunters and alligator hunters and everybody hunters. And what I said was, I honestly believe that if we stand idle and don't do anything, that the antis will pick whatever they consider to be the lowest hanging fruit in that geographical area, and they will go after it. And then they're going to wait to see who comes together and who's going to turn around and try to defeat that. If we're proactive and preemptive, we can defeat it before it becomes an issue. Sheep hunters, and I said this at the RMBS banquet, there's less sheep hunters, goat hunters, and moose hunters in the state of Colorado combined than there is mountain lion hunters. If mountain lion hunting was the low-hanging fruit, what the heck are the other things?
What are the other guys?
And so there might be more people that want to hunt bighorn sheep, mountain goat, and moose. But there's not more licenses given out. So the average person would say, I'm never going to hunt a goat or a sheep anyway. I already drew mine. I'm not going to draw. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. I'm not in that good enough health, or whatever it might be. We can't let our community be divided and conquered within ourselves
because we fight amongst each other.
That's the thing. Before the enemy is at our door, we can't beat ourselves down. We have to participate at so many different levels to where when the enemy comes, they go, "Holy crap! We didn't know we were going to run into that."
Well, again, look at the number of people that showed up at the Capitol.
Yes.
I think they were very surprised that there were that many people. And it wasn't like it was a beautiful, sunny
It was a crappy day.
July day.
It was a crappy day.
It was chilly, and you're thinking, oh.
We had a crappy day in April at the Capitol. It's Sports Day at the Capitol,
Yeah,
and we
it
still had
snowed
400
and rain
people.
And and I think that's the thing, is just bringing everybody together and saying, yeah, you can do this. And I think that's the key is, whether you're a hunting supporter or you're a hunter. And that's what Wild Sheep does a really great job of. There are hundreds of people at Sheep Show that aren't sheep hunters. They have something called Less Than One Club, and they give away 4 sheep hunts. And when they do this, there are 1,000 people in this room who, they've joined the Less Than One Club, whatever it costs to join, because they want to become a sheep hunter. And they've made it like it's the cool kids club. But these guys, if you ask them, they're all sheep hunters.
Yeah.
And they've never spent one day on the mountain. Not one day. And it's craziness. I mean, you'll meet people.
They strive to be, it's like the pinnacle of the pinnacles to be able to, I mean, I've talked to people that I've never been fortunate enough to travel out of the country, they would say. Well, I wasn't until I did. And it's just because I turned around and signed the credit card slip back in the day and decided I was going to do that. Everything is available to every single person or entity or organization that wants to try to accomplish that. But it's a lot easier when you're together. And it's a lot easier when you have a community and a network to be able to feed off of that.
And when you look at the family of the Wild Sheep Foundation, it's just, I mean, it's pretty cool. But it's a bunch of crazy guys that and gals that have I was raised with, they were all guys, but that was back in the.
But I met Kim Needers there, and from my understanding, she doesn't even hunt.
You know what? She just started. Just started. She went through the Women Hunt program, which is a pretty cool program that Wild Sheep Foundation started 4 or 5 years ago. And so she went down to Texas and learned the gamut. So they take women down and they teach them everything: how to use your rifle, how to clean the animal, how to the whole 9 yards. And so Kimmy has just started.
So she's just started.
Yeah, she's just started. But she's one of the biggest hunting advocates you'll ever meet. And yet she's
a rock star.
Yeah, she's just started hunting.
She really is a rock star, and I look forward to seeing her in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Well, Jann, give me a couple closing comments or phrases about RMBS, either what you guys have going, maybe it's raffles, maybe it's events, about Wild Sheep, maybe it's raffles and events, and then we'll close this out with a few other closing comments.
So Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, this is our 50th anniversary. And so in May, they are having their banquet up in Loveland. If you become a life member, then we have a Friday night event. And it's at a pretty cool trophy room in Windsor, Colorado. Just happens to be mine. But it's our 50th year, and they have a great slate of auction items. And it's just a good time. And again, there's a lot of non-sheep hunters that are there, and they're just, doing wildlife conservation. The live auction and the silent auction are both online. So you just go to online hunting auctions and you'll find it. Go to the website. You can see all the different, we do raffles throughout the year. Both do. RMBS and Wild Sheep Foundation do raffles throughout the year. And so it's, $25 and you can win a gun or a hunt or, all kinds of things. But the silent auctions for Wild Sheep Foundation are pretty cool. There's a lot of guns. And it's pretty neat. And you can do all that online. You don't have to go to Reno. You can, and then everything has to go through an FFL and all that kind of thing.
If somebody wants to get involved for volunteering for a conservation organization, that whether they hunt or whether they don't, maybe their kids want to get involved, maybe they're divorced, maybe they're a widow or whatever, what would you recommend for somebody just to say, I think I'd really be interested in that, but how do I get involved?
CPW has a really good website that has all the different opportunities there are, the hunter safety classes, that type of thing. If you go to Shields, Sportsman's Warehouse, Jack's, any of the sporting good places, Slide a Gun guys, everybody has a bulletin board, and those bulletin boards are crazy great information that tells you where the women hunt programs are, where the youth programs are. Our 4-H has a shooting club. There's also Colorado Youth Outdoors, which is in northern Colorado. There's so many opportunities. Google youth hunting, and it's pretty amazing what you're going to find. Wild Sheep Foundation, go to the website. You can look at the women hunt. We have an unbelievable youth hunting program, youth education mostly. We're working on a youth hunting program. But every organization, just go onto their website, pick out whichever one your favorite is, and you're going to see opportunities.
Cool. Well, we thank you very, very much for introducing yourself back in Reno last year at the Wild Sheep Show.
I know what you thought. You were like, who is this crazy broad?
You walked up. I thought, well, I already got a groupie. Look, she heard me speak one time, either that or I cussed and she wanted to chew my butt over it or something. So, no, you've become a good friend over the course of the last year. Appreciate your involvement. We'd like to have you back on as things continually progress. And as I told Lyle, we get our feet underneath our asses a little bit here. And we're trying to do something on the momentum that was built off the victory of 127. And some of this is going to be infotainment. Some of it's just going to be information. But you're an intricate part of all of this. And I think that the biggest thing that people should be able to learn off of what we're trying to do is it's not about a bunch of old white guys. No. It's about a very diversified package of individuals that enjoy conservation, whether they're from Alabama and whether they're black, or whether they're from California and whether they're a woman, or whether they're from Alaska and they want to hunt in Texas. Conservation is conservation, and Shane Mahoney talks about that in the North American model and the Wild Harvest Initiative. And I think the collaborative effort of what we built off of 127 can only continue to be pedestalized.
And we must.
And we have to.
We have to.
We have to be able to do that.
Yeah. We have to continue.
You're a badass yourself, and I look forward to continuing the friendship and the relationship. And we'd like to thank the Slide a Gun Shop. You mentioned those guys. I mean, they're sponsoring our podcast, and as is Minturn Anglers and Davis Tent, and we've got some others that are coming out of the woodwork. But we're going to build up a pretty good effort here, and we look for any feedback to come from the community, because we really believe that conservation has to happen through collaboration. And Jann, you're an intricate part of that. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Through the Gates. For more content like this, make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe on all of our channels.